Welcome to the Argentinian philosopher. Ideas made simple for everyday life. Imagine walking through life trying to understand who you are, your purpose, and the true nature of reality. Now, imagine that this journey isn't just personal, it reflects the evolution of human consciousness itself. Every idea, every realization that you have is part of a larger historical process, shaping not just individuals but civilization as a whole. Welcome to Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, one of the most complex and profound works in philosophy. In this video, we'll break down Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, his magnum opus, into clear, digestible ideas. We'll explore how consciousness develops, why this journey matters, and how it reveals the way we understand reality. If Hegel has always seemed too complicated, don't worry. By the end of this video, you will have a clear understanding of his philosophy and why it still matters today. To understand Hegel's ideas, we need to set the stage. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, a leading figure of German idealism, wrote the Phenomenology of Spirit in 1807, a time of profound political and philosophical change. The Enlightenment had emphasized reason. The French Revolution had shaken all power structures, and philosophers like Kant and Fichte were rethinking the way we understand reality itself. Kant had argued that our knowledge is shaped by the way our mind structures experience. Fichte took this further, emphasizing the role of self-consciousness in shaping reality. Hegel, however, went one step beyond. He argued that consciousness doesn't just exist, it evolves through a historical and dialectical process. Most philosophical works analyze thought in an abstract way, but Hegel does something radical. He tells a story, the story of consciousness itself. He traces how our understanding of reality develops over time, through contradictions, struggles, and breakthroughs. The journey isn't personal. It mirrors the historical evolution of human thought itself. This is why Hegel's Phenomenology is one of the most ambitious works in philosophy. So, what exactly is the Phenomenology of Spirit? At first glance, it might seem like just another dense philosophical treatise, but at its core, it's a story, a journey about how consciousness develops, transforms, and ultimately reaches its highest form of understanding. Hegel sees consciousness not as something static, but as something in motion, constantly evolving through experience, contradiction, and resolution. This journey moves through various stages of awareness, starting from the most basic level of perception, what Hegel calls sense certainty, and culminating in what he refers to as absolute knowing. But here's the key to all this. Consciousness does not evolve smoothly. It evolves through struggle. It encounters confusion, doubt, contradictions, and even crisis. But rather than being signs of failure, they are actually the engines of progress. Hegel's radical claim is that mistakes and conflicts are necessary steps towards higher understanding. Every breakdown of knowledge leads to its next breakthrough. Understanding the phenomenology of spirit is like understanding the history of thought itself, how ideas develop, not in isolation, but in response to challenges, corrections, and new discoveries. And the mechanism behind all this, the dialectical method. One of Hegel's most famous contributions to philosophy is the Dialectical Method, a model for understanding how ideas and knowledge evolve over time. The dialectic works in three key steps: affirmation, a starting belief, position, or framework of thought; negation, a contradiction or challenge that opposes the limitations or flaws of the affirmation; negation of negation, a new higher understanding that reconciles the contradiction and transcends both the affirmation and the negation. This tension between opposing ideas is not a problem, it's the engine of progress. Every contradiction forces consciousness to move forward, seeking a higher understanding that includes what came before, while overcoming its limitations. The dialectic doesn't just apply to philosophy. It explains how scientific revolutions happen, how political movements evolve, and even how our personal growth unfolds. How many times in your life you changed your beliefs because you encountered evidence, experiences, or challenges that force you to rethink? Hegel's dialectic is a model for how change and development happens everywhere, and nowhere is this clearer than in the stages of consciousness he outlines. At the lowest stage, consciousness trusts only immediate sensory experience. Think about the way a child perceives the world. Everything is taken at face value, with no deeper reflection. But Hegel shows that this is an illusion. What we perceive is always shaped by interpretation. If knowledge were just about raw perception, how could we ever make sense of things like memories, concepts, or abstract ideas? Once consciousness realizes that mere perception is not enough to understand reality, it begins to develop concepts to organize and understand reality. But this, too, is unstable, because even our concepts can be flawed and limited. One of Hegel's most famous ideas appears at this stage: the master-slave dialectic. Imagine two self-conscious beings encountering one another. Each seeks recognition, but if one dominates the other, true recognition is lost. The master relies on the slave for validation, while the slave, through struggle, develops a higher awareness of freedom. This dialectic becomes a metaphor for power struggles, historical revolutions, and even personal identity developments. Each of these stages pushes consciousness forward, leading toward absolute knowing, where consciousness finally grasps the interconnected nature of all reality. After self-consciousness, consciousness moves to the stage of reason, where it begins to grasp that reality is not just something out there, it is shaped by human thought itself. This leads to spirit, where consciousness realizes that knowledge isn't just individual but collective, formed through history, culture, and shared institutions. Finally, at the highest level, consciousness reaches absolute knowing, the moment it fully understands that reality and thought are fundamentally interconnected. Here, all contradictions are resolved, and self-awareness is no longer fragmented, but embraces the totality of existence. But absolute knowing is too vast to cover here, so stay tuned for a future video where we cover how Hegel reaches his grand conclusion. Why does any of this matter? Because the struggle between ideas, contradictions, and resolutions isn't just a philosophical problem. It's happening all around us all of the time. Think about how societies evolve. Monarchies collapse, democracy rises, old traditions clashes against modern innovations. Revolutions and reform movements are a real-world example of dialectic in action, where one idea dominates, is challenged, and eventually leads to a new synthesis. The same applies to science. Our understanding of the universe is constantly changing. All theories are questioned and replaced with more refined models. Newton's physics was once considered final, until Einstein's theory of relativity exposed its limits. Even on an individual level, our beliefs evolve through challenge. Have you experienced a moment where a book, a discussion, or a difficult experience force you to rethink your worldview? That's the dialectic in action, pushing you towards deeper awareness. Hegel's message is clear. Contradiction isn't failure. It's the very process of growth. Every challenge forces us forward, whether in history, knowledge, or self-development. So, what have we learned? Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit is about growth through contradiction. It explains how consciousness develops not in a straight line, but through struggle and breakthroughs. The Dialectical Method shows us that progress is not about avoiding conflict, but learning from it. These are our key takeaways. Dialectic: the truth emerges from struggle. The stages of consciousness: each step builds on the previous one. Personal relevance of all this: we learn through challenges, just like in knowledge and history. Now let's apply all this to your own life. Can you think of a time where your personal beliefs were challenged, and instead of rejecting the challenge, you grew because of it? Maybe your political views changed after a debate. Maybe a personal failure forced you to rethink your values. That's the dialectic in action. Hegel believed that personal and intellectual growth are ongoing processes. What do you think? Let's continue the conversation in the comments below. How have contradictions shaped your thinking? And if you want to explore Hegel's ideas further, don't miss on an incoming video where we will discuss the master-slave dialectic, a concept that has changed how we think about power, recognition, and freedom. Thank you, and see you next time.